The obsidian blade stopped 3 centimeters from Marcus Chen's throat. He could see his reflection in the polished stone, distorted and pale. The Valtrian royal guard holding it didn't blink. None of them did. Their 6 eyes tracked every breath he took, every micro-tremor in his hands. The throne room had gone silent, except for the crystalline hum of the palace walls responding to elevated stress hormones in the air. "Explain yourself, human." The queen's voice carried the weight of collapsed stars. She sat perfectly still on her throne of living coral, platinum skin gleaming under bioluminescent chandeliers. Her crown pulsed with each word, neural filaments dancing like angry serpents. Marcus swallowed. The blade tracked the movement. "I didn't mean," he started. "You laughed." The queen leaned forward. "During the ceremony of first blooming, the most sacred moment in a Valtrian princess's life." "Your Majesty, I can explain." Silence. She raised one elegant hand. The guards pressed closer, forming a circle of gleaming armor and barely restrained violence. "There are only 2 paths before you now, Marcus Chen of Earth. You will marry Princess Vira and restore the honor you stole, or you will die where you stand. Choose." 12 hours ago he'd been a cultural liaison, a nobody with a linguistics degree, thrilled to be part of humanity's first diplomatic mission to the Valtrian Empire. Now he was going to die because of a 7-year-old's joke. Princess Vira stood beside her mother's throne, small and silent. The ceremonial flowers still tangled in her silver hair. She wouldn't look at him. "May I ask what I did wrong?" Marcus kept his voice steady. "I genuinely don't know." "You don't know." "Of course you don't. You humans arrive with your delegations and your treaties, your crude attempts at diplomacy, and you understand nothing." She gestured, and a holographic display bloomed in the air between them. It showed the ceremony from an hour ago. Marcus watched himself standing in the observation gallery with the other human diplomats, watched Princess Vira step onto the sacred dais, nervous and small in her ceremonial robes. The priestess began the ancient chant. Vira was supposed to respond with the ritual words, ancient Valtrian that even Marcus's translator struggled with. Instead, the 7-year-old had frozen, panicked. And in her fear, she'd blurted out the wrong phrase entirely. What she'd meant to say was, "I embrace the eternal gardens." What she'd actually said was, "I embrace the eternal gardens of my butt." Had recognized the simple mistake any nervous child might make. The words were nearly identical in Valtrian, separated by a single tonal shift. And in that moment of understanding, of recognition of universal childhood anxiety making a princess mess up at the worst possible time, he'd laughed, not mockingly, not with cruelty, with understanding. With the gentle amusement of someone who'd once called his teacher Mom in 3rd grade and wanted to die. The recording showed his quiet chuckle, showed the immediate devastating silence that followed, showed guards moving, diplomats freezing, and a small princess starting to cry. "I dishonored her," Marcus said quietly, understanding flooding through him. "In Valtrian culture, laughter at someone during a ceremony is mockery. I didn't know." "Ignorance," the queen said, "is not innocence. You have shamed my daughter before the entire court, before the priesthood, before the ancestors themselves." Her voice dropped to something colder than vacuum. "Valtrian law is absolute. Either you bond yourself to her in marriage, accepting responsibility for her honor as your own, or you forfeit your life. There is no third option." "She's 7 years old. The marriage would be ceremonial until she reaches maturity in 16 cycles. The queen's tone suggested this should be obvious. "You would serve as her sworn protector, her guardian of honor. When she comes of age, she may choose to dissolve the bond or maintain it. But your life, your freedom, your very existence would be hers to command." She was crying silently, trying to hide it. A child who'd made a mistake and watched it spiral into an international incident. A little girl who now had her future chained to a stranger because he'd laughed at the wrong moment. "I choose marriage," he said. The queen blinked, all 6 eyes in sequence. "You accept these terms?" "Without negotiation. I wronged her. I'll make it right." Marcus met the queen's gaze steadily. "But I have one condition." The blade pressed against his skin, drew a single drop of blood. "You dare negotiate with the Eternal Throne?" A request." He didn't look away. "Teach me. Your customs, your language, your culture. Everything I need to know to serve Princess Vira properly. I won't dishonor her again through ignorance." Silence stretched. The queen studied him with alien eyes that had executed thousands, conquered worlds, burned fleets to ash. Marcus forced himself to breathe normally, to show respect but not fear. Finally, she spoke. "Bring the ceremonial chains." The guards moved with practiced precision, producing ornate shackles of living metal that writhed like silver serpents. They would bind him to Vyra, mark him as property of the Valtrian throne, symbiotically link his life force to hers. As they approached, Princess Vyra finally looked up at him. Her eyes were wide, terrified. She mouthed something in Valtrian too quiet for his translator to catch. Marcus smiled at her gently, not laughing, not mocking, just trying to tell a scared little girl that it would be okay. Her expression shifted. Confusion replaced fear. The chains locked around his wrists with a sound like breaking glass and ringing bells. "Rise, bond-sworn Marcus Chen," the queen commanded. "Your life is no longer your own. Fail my daughter again, and death will be a mercy I do not grant." Marcus stood, chains weighing nothing and everything simultaneously. Through the metal, he could feel Vyra's heartbeat, rapid, afraid, young. He'd come to the stars seeking adventure. He'd found something else entirely. The queen's next words changed everything. The first lesson begins at dawn. "You have one solar cycle to prove you can survive Valtrian court politics, bondsworn. Most humans don't last a week." She smiled without warmth. "I suggest you sleep well tonight. It will be your last peaceful rest." The guards moved to escort him to his new quarters. As they turned, Marcus caught movement in the shadows behind the throne. Other figures watching. Waiting. Eyes gleaming with calculation. He'd agreed to marriage to save his life. He was beginning to realize survival was going to be much more complicated than that. The palace swallowed him whole, and somewhere in its crystal depths, something ancient stirred with interest. The human had chosen chains over death. That was unusual. That was worth watching. Marcus Chen had 12 hours before his education in Valtrian politics began. He spent them trying not to think about the weight around his wrists or the child's heartbeat echoing through the metal. He failed at both. Dawn came too quickly and brought with it lessons written in blood. The instructor arrived before sunrise, a blade in each hand and contempt in all 6 eyes. Commander Kethris was ancient by Valtrian standards, her platinum skin marked with scars that told stories of a dozen wars. She stood in the doorway of Marcus's quarters and studied him the way a butcher studies meat. "Stand," she commanded. Marcus rose from the sleeping platform. The chains hummed against his skin, reacting to his elevated pulse. He'd barely slept, mind churning through everything that had happened, trying to understand the culture he'd offended so catastrophically. "Your first lesson, bond sworn. In Valtrian society, everything is hierarchy. The queen stands above all. Her daughter stands above you. You stand above nothing." Kethris moved into the room, circling him slowly. "You are property now. The lowest form of life in this palace. Even the cleaning drones have more value. Do you understand?" "Yes, Commander." "You understand nothing." She struck without warning, blade flashing toward his face. Marcus jerked back, stumbling. The chains flared hot, and somewhere in the palace he felt Vyra wake suddenly, frightened by the spike of adrenaline flooding their bond. Kethris paused, studied the chains thoughtfully. "Interesting. The bond took stronger than expected. You actually feel each other." She sheathed her blade. "That will make this easier or impossible. We'll discover which." "What are you teaching me exactly?" "Survival." She moved to the window, gesturing at the sprawling palace complex below. "You see those towers? Each houses a different faction of the court. The military advisors in obsidian, the priesthood in white crystal, the merchant guilds in copper. They all want something from the queen. They all scheme, plot, maneuver for advantage. What does this have to do with me?" "Everything, bondsworn." Kethris turned back to him. "You're an opportunity. A human bound to the royal family. A bridge between species, or a weapon to be used against the queen. There are already 17 plots forming around your existence. By sunset, there will be 30. Marcus felt cold despite the warm morning air. "Plots to do what?" "Kill you. Manipulate you. Use you to embarrass the princess. Turn you into a spy. Seduce you. Break you. The variations are endless, but they all end with either your death or your corruption." She smiled without humor. "Welcome to court, bondsworn. Try to last the week." The next 3 hours were brutal instruction in Valtrian politics, culture, and the 1,000 ways to die in a royal palace. Marcus learned that eye contact duration communicated social status, that the color of fabric mattered more than he'd imagined. That silence could be agreement, disagreement, or threat depending on context and timing. That he'd already made 17 additional mistakes since arriving without knowing it. When Kethris finally dismissed him, his head spun with information. "Your schedule," she said, pressing a data crystal into his hand. "Morning training with me, afternoon lessons with the princess, evening court attendance, sleep when you can. Trust no one, speak to no one, without explicit permission. The queen is watching everything you do." "Watching for what? Failure?" Kethris moved toward the door, then paused. "One more thing, Bondsworn. The princess didn't want this. The marriage, the bond, any of it. She's terrified of you. Your job is to prove you're worth the mercy you were granted. If you can't do that, the queen will end you and spare her daughter the burden." She left him alone with his thoughts and the weight of chains that grew heavier with every passing moment. The afternoon lesson took place in the princess's private gardens, a sprawling maze of bioluminescent plants and crystalline fountains. Vira sat on a bench beneath a flowering arch, her tutor beside her, guards stationed at every entrance. Marcus approached slowly, keeping his movements careful and non-threatening. The tutor was elderly, female with kind eyes that nonetheless tracked him like a predator. "Bondsworn." The tutor's voice was formal. "I am Scholar Myrth. I have been charged with facilitating interaction between you and Princess Vira. You will speak only when spoken to. You will maintain proper distance. You will show appropriate deference at all times. I understand." She wore simpler clothes than yesterday, but still ornate by human standards. The flowers had been removed from her hair, leaving it hanging loose and silver in the strange light. "Princess," Myrith said gently, "your bondsworn is here. Vira, sweetness, you must acknowledge him." Still nothing. The child's hands trembled in her lap.
Marcus understood suddenly.
She was ashamed, mortified. A 7-year-old had made a mistake in front of everyone, and now a stranger was bound to her for life because of it. He thought about his own childhood, his own moments of crushing embarrassment, and he did something that definitely wasn't in Kethris's instructions. He sat down, carefully, at the far end of the bench, maintained proper distance, but sat. Myrith stiffened. "Bondsworn, you were not given permission. I once called my math teacher Dad in front of my entire class," Marcus said quietly, speaking to no one in particular. "I was 8. I wanted to die. I genuinely considered running away from home and living in the woods." She didn't look up, but she was listening. "I also tripped during a school play and tore my costume. Forgot the words to a song I was supposed to perform solo. Showed up to picture day with my shirt on backwards." He kept his voice gentle, conversational. "Everyone makes mistakes, Princess. Even adults, especially during important moments when we're nervous." "I ruined everything," Vira whispered, first words she'd spoken to him. "You made a small error. The adults made it into something bigger. It's not your fault." Watching. "I'm sorry I laughed," Marcus continued. "In my culture, that kind of mistake is something we laugh about together after. Like, remember that time? It's how we make it hurt less. But I didn't know it would hurt you more in your culture. That's my mistake, and I'm sorry." Vira finally looked at him. Her eyes were luminous, still damp with tears. "You're really stuck with me now, because of what you did." "Yes, forever, until you decide otherwise." She processed this. "I don't want a bondsworn. I don't want someone who has to pretend to care, because magic chains make them. The chains don't make me care, Princess. They just make me stay. But you're right, I don't know you. You don't know me. We're strangers who got forced together by circumstance and culture." He paused. "Maybe we could try to become friends instead? Who help each other, who make mistakes together and laugh about them after." He smiled slightly. "I could use a friend in this palace. Everything here is strange and complicated, and I keep almost dying. You're bad at being Valtreyan. The absolute worst. Mother says humans are primitive and loud and don't understand anything important." That got a small giggle. Myreth relaxed infinitesimally. "Can I ask you something?" Marcus said. "In the ceremony? I know what you said by accident, but what was the right phrase?" I retold him in Valtreyan, the proper words flowing musically. "And what you actually said was?" He repeated her mistake. "Don't?" But she was almost laughing. "It's not funny. It's a little funny." I would have made the same mistake. "Really?" "Absolutely. I still can't tell if I'm saying pleased to meet you or your face smells interesting in Valtreyan. I'm probably offending everyone constantly. That got a real laugh, bright and childish and genuine." The tension in the garden eased. Guards remained alert, but their postures shifted slightly. Less like they were protecting Vyra from Marcus, more like they were simply on duty. Myrith watched it all with calculating eyes. When the lesson ended an hour later, she pulled Marcus aside while Vyra played with a holographic puzzle in the fountain area. "That was well done, Bondsworn. I just talked to her." "You did more than that. You gave her permission to be a child about this instead of a princess. She needed that." Myrith studied him carefully. "You might actually survive the week. But be warned. There are those who will use your kindness against you, who will see weakness in treating her gently. Let them. Brave words. We'll see if you maintain them when the knives come out." They came that evening during court. The throne room glittered with Valtrian nobility, hundreds of them arranged in perfect hierarchical order. The queen sat in absolute stillness, observing everything. Vyra stood beside the throne, small and uncomfortable in formal robes. Marcus had been positioned behind them both, standing in the Bondsworn's traditional place, silent, observant, property. The petitions began. Trade disputes, military promotions, religious concerns. Marcus tried to follow the complex politics, but lost track quickly. Everything operated on layers of meaning his translator couldn't capture, social nuances that took decades to understand. Then Lord Therex approached the throne. He was massive by Valtrian standards, nearly 7 feet tall, with the bearing of someone who'd commanded armies. His house colors were obsidian and crimson, military aristocracy. His eyes found Marcus immediately, tracked him with predatory interest. "Your Majesty," Therex said, bowing with perfect precision, "I come before you with concern for the princess's well-being." "Speak, Lord Therex." The Bondsworn. "The human." Therax gestured dismissively in Marcus's direction without actually looking at him.
The insult was deliberate.
Calculated. Untrained. A liability in a court filled with danger. "I humbly request permission to evaluate his worthiness through traditional means." The queen's expression revealed nothing. "You wish to challenge him?" "I wish to ensure Princess Vyra's protector can actually protect Her Majesty. Surely you share this concern." This was a trap. Marcus could feel it, even if he didn't fully understand the mechanisms. Beside the throne, Vera had gone rigid. "The Bondsworn is newly sworn," the queen said carefully. "He lacks training. Then he is unfit for his position." Therex smiled. "I merely suggest a simple test. Place him in the trials of worth for one night. If he emerges at dawn, he has proven his value. If not," he shrugged. "The princess deserves better." Marcus felt Kethry's tense somewhere in the crowd. This was bad. Very bad. "Mother, please," Vyra whispered. "Don't silence, daughter." The queen's voice carried absolute authority. She studied Therex with ancient eyes that had seen this game played countless times. "You suggest this out of concern for my daughter?" "Only that, Majesty. I serve the throne always." Everyone knew it. But Therex had positioned himself perfectly. To refuse would suggest the queen doubted her own choice of Bondsworn. To accept risked Marcus's life in whatever horror the trials of worth contained. Very well. The queen's decision fell like an executioner's blade. At sunset tomorrow, the Bondsworn will enter the trials. He will emerge at dawn, or not at all. Marcus felt Vyra's spike of fear through the bond, sharp and terrified. She turned to look at him, eyes wide. He tried to keep his expression calm, reassuring. Tried to pretend his heart wasn't hammering. Therex bowed deeply, satisfaction evident in every line of his body. The throne is generous and wise. The rest of the court session passed in a blur. When it finally ended, and Marcus was dismissed to his quarters, Kethris followed him. "You're dead," she said without preamble. "What are the trials of worth?" Ancient challenges. Tests that determine if someone possesses the qualities Valtreans value. Strength, cunning, honor. They were designed for Valtrean warriors, Bondsworn, not soft humans who barely survive their first day at court. Has anyone ever died in them? 30% mortality rate? Higher for non-Valtreans? She moved to his window, looking out at the palace grounds. Therex played that perfectly. He's from the military faction that opposes the Queen's alliance with humanity. Your death in the trials would embarrass her, traumatize the princess, and set human-Valtrean relations back decades. So I can't die. You also can't win. The trials will break you. Marcus sat down heavily. His hands shook slightly. Then, what do I do? Survive. However you can. The trials don't require victory, Bond sworn. Just endurance until dawn. She turned back to him. I'll train you tomorrow. Everything I can teach in one day. It won't be enough, but it's all we have. She left him alone with his fear and the weight of chains that had become a death sentence. That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He paced his quarters, mind racing through everything he'd learned, trying to find an angle, a solution. Through the bond, he felt Vira's nightmares, her terror bleeding into his consciousness. A child afraid she'd caused another person's death. Near midnight, his door opened. No knock. Princess Vira stood in the hallway wearing sleep clothes and clutching a small holographic datapad. Her guards waited in the corridor, carefully not looking. You're awake, she said quietly. So are you, Princess. I can't sleep. She moved into the room uninvited, her guards making no move to stop her. Royal privilege. I keep thinking about tomorrow. About what Lord Therex did? It's not your fault. All of it. If I hadn't made that stupid mistake during the ceremony, you wouldn't be here. Wouldn't be bondsworn. Wouldn't have to go into the trials. Tears streaked her face. I don't want you to die because of me. Marcus crouched down to her level. Hey, listen to me. You made a small mistake during a scary moment, that's all. Everything that happened after, all the adult politics and power plays, that's not on you, that's on us. But no buts. You're 7 years old, Vira. You're supposed to make mistakes. You're supposed to mess up and learn and grow. The adults around you should have handled it better, including me. He managed to smile. I'm the idiot who laughed at the wrong time, remember? If anyone's at fault here, it's me. You laughed because you understood, because you knew it was just a mistake. She wiped at her tears angrily. Everyone else was angry or embarrassed or disappointed. You just understood. I did. So I can't let you die. Vira held up her datapad. I've been researching. The Trials of Worth. Every historical record I could access. I found something. Marcus took the datapad, scrolling through pages of dense Valtrian text. His translator struggled with the archaic language, but certain patterns emerged. Historical accounts of previous trials. Survival statistics. Analysis of successful versus failed attempts. What am I looking at? A pattern. Vira pointed to specific passages, her voice gaining confidence. She was a princess, educated by the best tutors in the Empire, and it showed in how quickly she parsed complex information. Everyone who dies in the trials tries to fight their way through, but everyone who survives does something different. What? They use what makes them unique instead of trying to be perfect Valtrian warriors. Her eyes met his. You're human. You think differently than we do. Use that. Marcus read the accounts more carefully. She was right. The survivors had all found unconventional solutions, approached challenges from unexpected angles. The ones who died had tried to match Valtrian standards and failed. This might actually help. It has to help. Vira's voice was fierce. Because you're going to survive, Marcus Chen. You're going to come back at dawn, and then we're going to be proper friends like you said. And later, when I'm old enough, I'm going to dissolve this stupid bond so you can go home and have a real life instead of being stuck with me forever. Something tightened in his chest. What if I don't want that? To dissolve the bond. What if we actually become friends? Real friends. And I choose to stay. No one would choose this. I might. Ask me again in 16 cycles. She smiled through her tears. You're strange. Extremely. They studied the historical accounts together until Vira fell asleep on the bench by the window, her datapad still glowing in her lap. Marcus carefully covered her with a blanket and dimmed the lights. The guards in the hallway made no move to retrieve her. Letting the princess sleep where she chose, granting her this small rebellion, Marcus finally slept a few hours before dawn, his dreams full of ancient trials and impossible challenges. Kethris arrived at first light, grim and focused. Training begins now. She taught him Valtrian combat basics, knowing he'd never master them in time, but giving him foundational awareness. Taught him meditation techniques to control fear and pain. Drilled him on palace geography, hidden passages, emergency protocols, filled his mind with every scrap of knowledge that might keep him alive. The trials are different for everyone, she explained during a brief water break. They adapt to the participant, test specific qualities. For you, they'll likely focus on loyalty, honor, cunning, qualities the bondsworn position requires. How do I prepare for tests I can't predict? You remember who you are. Remember why you're doing this. She studied him carefully. Most bond-sworn are criminals given a choice between execution and service. You volunteered. That matters. That means something. Does it matter enough to keep me alive? We'll find out at sunset. The sun moved too quickly across the alien sky. Before Marcus was ready, before he'd processed half of what Kethris had tried to teach him, the time came. The trials took place in the ancient catacombs beneath the palace, crystalline passages that hummed with energy older than human civilization. The entrance was a massive archway carved with Valtrain script that Marcus's translator rendered as something like, "Here lies truth, purchased with blood and will." The entire court had gathered to watch, not the trials themselves, which were private, but the entrance and exit, to witness either triumph or failure. Lord Theric stood at the front, satisfaction evident in his posture. The queen sat on a transported throne, expression unreadable. Vyra stood beside her mother, pale and frightened. She met Marcus's eyes across the crowd, and he felt her fear through the bond like physical pain. Kethris led him to the archway. Survive until dawn, that's all. Forget everything else. Just survive. Prove me wrong about the weak prediction, bond sworn. Marcus smiled despite his fear. That's the plan. Bowed with the precision Kethris had drilled into him. Then he walked through the archway into darkness. The entrance sealed behind him with a sound like breaking bones. Silence. Complete and absolute. Then light bloomed, soft and blue, revealing a corridor stretching into impossible distance. The walls pulsed with bioluminescence, patterns shifting like breathing. A voice spoke in perfect English, which somehow made it more unsettling. Welcome Marcus Chen, bondsworn to Princess Vyra of the Eternal Throne. The trials of worth begin now. You will face 3 challenges before dawn, survive all 3, and emerge with honor. Fail even one, and the catacombs claim you forever. What are the challenges? They are unique to you. Unique to this moment. Unique to the bond you carry. The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. The first trial begins in 30 seconds. Prepare yourself. Marcus's heart hammered. He checked his breathing, trying to remember Kethris's meditation techniques. He had no weapons, no tools, just himself and whatever he could improvise. The corridor transformed. Walls shifted, reformed, became something else. Marcus found himself standing in a perfect replica of his childhood bedroom on Earth. Every detail exact, down to the posters on the walls and the stain on the carpet where he'd spilled grape juice at age 9. His mother sat on the bed exactly as she'd looked the last time he'd seen her before leaving Earth. Smiling, warm, real. Marcus, honey, it's time to come home. He knew it wasn't real. Knew it was a simulation, a test, something the trials had pulled from his memories through the bond's connection to his mind. Knowing didn't make it hurt less. This isn't real, he said quietly. Does that matter? You could stay? The trials would end. You'd be here, safe, away from all the politics and danger and impossible situations. His mother's voice was exactly as he remembered. You don't owe these aliens anything. You made one mistake. You shouldn't have to die for it. I made a choice. A choice made under threat of death. That's coercion, not consent. The Queen gave you an impossible situation. The court is using you as a pawn. Even the princess, sweet as she seems, is still part of a system that enslaved you. Come home, Marcus. Please. Doubts he'd wrestled with. What's the test here, he asked the empty air. What quality are you measuring? The room flickered. His mother's smile turned sad. Loyalty, the voice answered. The bondsworn must be loyal beyond reason, beyond self-interest. You are given the choice to abandon your duty with no consequence, to return to comfort and safety. Do you stay or do you continue? Marcus thought about Vyra, frightened and alone in the crowd above. Thought about the weight of chains that had become familiar. Thought about a 7-year-old who'd given him historical research and believed he could survive. I continue. His mother faded like smoke. First trial complete. Loyalty confirmed. Second trial begins now. The corridor reformed into something new. Valtrian architecture, but the setup was familiar. A judge's bench, witness stand, jury box. And standing in chains at the defendant's position was Princess Vyra, looking even smaller and more terrified than in real life. Lord Theric stood as prosecutor, massive and intimidating. You are called as witness Marcus Chen. The trial voice had shifted, become formal and cold. Princess Vyra stands accused of incompetence, of weakness, of bringing shame to the Eternal Throne through her mistake during the blooming ceremony. Your testimony will determine her fate. Speak truthfully or be forsworn and die. Theric smiled. Tell the court, Bondsworn, did Princess Vyra fail in her duties during the ceremony? This was the test. Marcus could feel it. Truth versus loyalty. Honor versus protection. She made a mistake, he said carefully. A critical failure during the most important ceremony of her young life, witnessed by thousands. Recorded for history. Therax pressed forward. Would you call this failure acceptable? I'd call it human. Valtrian. Whatever. I'd call it what anyone might do when frightened and pressured. But it was a failure. Say it clearly. Did she fail? Marcus looked at the simulated Vyra, saw tears streaming down her face. This was testing honor. The requirement to speak truth even when it hurt those he cared about. She made an error in the ceremony, he said slowly. But failure suggests she could have done better and chose not to. She was 7 years old, performing an ancient ritual under immense pressure, speaking words she'd only just learned. In that context, making a small verbal mistake isn't failure, it's probability. Semantics, Therax sneered. Truth, Marcus countered. You asked for my truthful testimony. This is it. Princess Vyra did not fail. The situation failed her. We all failed her by expecting perfection from a child. Second trial complete, honor through truth maintained. Even when truth is uncomfortable, the Bondsworn speaks it. Final trial begins now. The scene shifted one last time. Marcus stood in the throne room, but everything was wrong. The queen sat motionless on her throne, a blade through her heart. Dead. Vyra stood over her mother's body, a bloody knife in her small hands, eyes wide with shock and horror. Guards filled the room, weapons drawn. All pointed at the princess. She killed the queen, Commander Kethris said, her voice hollow. We all saw it. Princess Vyra murdered her own mother? That's not possible. You weren't there. You didn't see. But we did. Kethris gestured at the assembled guards, at court officials all nodding in agreement. The evidence is absolute. The penalty is death. Unless someone claims responsibility instead, the Bondsworn can invoke ancient right of substitution. Take her punishment. Die in her place. It's the only way to save her, the ultimate loyalty. Marcus looked at the simulated Vyra, at the knife in her hands, at the dead queen. None of it was real. But the test was whether he'd give his life for hers without question, without demanding proof or explanation. This is wrong, he said quietly. The Bondsworn refuses sacrifice? The trial voice sounded almost surprised. The Bondsworn refuses blind sacrifice. You want me to die for her without knowing what actually happened, without hearing her side, without investigation or due process. Marcus moved to stand beside Vyra's simulation. That's not loyalty. That's stupidity. Real protection means finding the truth, not just dying heroically. The scene froze. Silence stretched. Then the voice spoke again, and for the first time it sounded almost approving. Third trial complete, wisdom through restraint. The Bondsworn knows when to sacrifice and when to question, when to protect through action and when to protect through truth-seeking. Everything dissolved. Marcus stood in an empty chamber, the blue light fading to normal illumination. A doorway appeared in the far wall, showing the first light of dawn filtering through crystal passages. The trials of worth are complete. Marcus Chen, Bondsworn to Princess Vyra, you have proven yourself worthy through loyalty, honor, and wisdom. You may emerge. His legs barely supported him. The emotional weight of the trials had been devastating, even knowing they weren't real. But he'd survived. Actually survived. He walked toward the dawn light on shaking legs. The crowd waited beyond the archway, having maintained their vigil through the entire night. They erupted into surprised murmurs when Marcus emerged, bloodied from where he'd fallen during the trials, but very much alive. Lord Therax looked like he'd bitten into poison. The Queen's expression shifted infinitesimally, something that might have been approval. Vyra broke free from her mother's side and ran to him, propriety and protocol forgotten. She crashed into his legs, hugging him fiercely. You came back, she sobbed. You actually came back. Marcus rested a hand on her silver hair, too exhausted to care about court opinion. Told you I would. We have a friendship to work on, remember? The crowd silenced immediately. The Bondsworn has proven his worth. Let no one question his position or value again. Her eyes found Lord Therax with predatory focus. Those who do question it will answer to me personally. Therex bowed stiffly, fury radiating from every line of his body. He'd lost this round, but Marcus suspected the war was far from over. Kethris approached as the crowd began to disperse. You survived. Surprised? Moderately. She studied him with new respect. The trials are different for everyone, but they're never easy. What did they show you? Truth. Sacrifice. Marcus was too tired to elaborate. And you chose to return. Chose duty over comfort. She nodded slowly. You might actually be suited for this position, Bondsworn. Against all probability, brutal training with Kethris each morning. Afternoon lessons with Vyra that gradually shifted from formal instruction to genuine companionship. Evening court attendance where Marcus learned to navigate political waters that would have drowned him weeks earlier. Vyra began to smile more, to speak freely around him, to treat him less like an obligation and more like the friend he'd suggested they could be. 3 months after the trials, she asked him a question during their afternoon lesson. Do you miss Earth? Marcus considered it honestly. Sometimes. I miss my family. Certain foods.
Season's changing.
He smiled at her. But I'd miss you more if I left. Not because of the chains, just because of who you are. She processed this quietly. When I'm grown, when I'm 23 cycles, I'm supposed to decide about the bond. Mother says I can dissolve it if I want. Set you free. You'll have that choice, yes. What if I don't want to let you go? Marcus felt something warm settle in his chest. Then I'll stay. As long as you want me here. Even though I ruined your life by messing up a ceremony? You changed things, definitely. But I've learned more in 3 months here than in years on Earth. Become someone better. Found purpose. He met her eyes steadily. You didn't ruin my life, Princess. You might have saved it. Vera smiled, genuine and bright. Then, with the casual cruelty of children everywhere, she changed the subject completely. Myreth says I need to learn advanced mathematics. It's horrible. Want to help me suffer through it? Absolutely not. But I'll sit with you while you work. Vyra grew from child to adolescent, from adolescent to young adult. The bond between them evolved naturally, from guardian in charge to something closer to siblings, then to genuine friendship built on mutual respect and shared experience. Marcus became a fixture of the Valtrian court, the human bondsworn who'd survived the trials and won over the difficult princess. He learned the language fluently, mastered court politics, became someone the queen actually consulted on matters of human Valtrain relations. Therex and his faction continued their schemes, but Marcus learned to counter them. Kethris trained him until he could hold his own against Valtrian warriors. Myreth taught him history and culture until he understood the deeper context of every court interaction. And through it all, Vyra remained at the center of his world. Her laughter, her growth, her increasingly sophisticated understanding of the role she'd someday inherit. On her 23rd naming day, the day she legally became an adult by Valtrian law, she summoned Marcus to the private gardens where they'd had their first real conversation years earlier. You know what today means, she said without preamble. I do. I can dissolve the bond. Set you free. You'd be released from all obligations, all duties, could return to Earth or stay on Valtre as a citizen rather than property. She studied him carefully. Mother says I should consider it seriously, that keeping you bound is cruel after all these years. What do you think? Vyra smiled. I think you once told a scared 7-year-old that you might choose to stay even if given the option to leave. Do you still mean that? Marcus thought about Earth, about the life he'd left behind. Then he thought about the life he'd built here. The purpose he'd found, the relationships that mattered. The young woman before him who'd grown from frightened child into someone extraordinary. I still mean it. Even though the bond would become different. Not bond sworn in charge, but... She hesitated. Equal partners in a ceremonial marriage? I wouldn't command you, wouldn't own you. We'd just be bound. Together, as adults who choose it. Is that what you want? I'm asking what you want, Marcus. He took her hand carefully. The chains they both wore hummed with recognition, energy flowing between them. 16 years of shared experience, shared growth, shared life. I want to stay. Not because chains compel me, because you matter to me. Because this life matters. Because somewhere between that disastrous ceremony and now, this became home. Vyra's eyes gleamed with tears. You're sure? You can't take it back after today. I'm sure. Then I choose to maintain the bond. not as owner and property, but as partners. Friends. Family. She smiled through her tears. Is that acceptable to you? More than acceptable. The weight Marcus had carried for 16 years shifted, transformed. No longer the heavy burden of servitude, but something lighter, more balanced. A connection chosen rather than imposed. There, Vira said softly, now we're properly stuck with each other. Wouldn't have it any other way. They stood in the garden as dawn broke over the Valtrian palace, two people bound by chains and choice, by accident and intention, by a child's mistake that had become something neither could have predicted. The queen watched from her tower window, 6 eyes seeing everything. She'd known this outcome was possible from the moment Marcus Chen had walked into those trials. Had known her daughter might choose to keep him, and that he might choose to stay. She approved. Lord Therex watched from his own quarters and plotted. The human had survived again. Had. Thrived. But there were always more games to play, more schemes to unfold. Patience was a virtue he'd mastered over centuries. Kethris smiled to herself in the training yards and adjusted her betting pool. She'd wagered Marcus would last a week. He'd lasted 16 years and counting. She owed Scholar Mirith a significant sum. And in the gardens, Marcus and Vira talked and laughed and planned for a future neither had expected but both had chosen. A human and a Valtrian princess, bound by chains that no longer felt like imprisonment, looking toward dawn and whatever it would bring. Hey, Vira, Marcus said eventually. Yes? Thank you for messing up that ceremony. Thank you for laughing at the wrong time. They were an unlikely pair. A diplomatic incident turned into partnership. A mistake transformed into destiny. But then, the best things often were.